Hey, kids and teachers and people and internet cray people. Welcome to AP Government Guru Review Live. My name is Keith Hughes, known as HipHughes on the YouTubes. I'm a teacher in Buffalo, New York. Been doing AP Gov for quite a long time. And we're going to see if we can't do the best we can in about 90 minutes to try and cover the basics of the course, some vocabulary that maybe escapes kids. I know that Mr. Richey is really good at pinpointing which questions kids are getting wrong. We're going to talk about that through the evening, test strategies, and just try to get a read of it for y'all. How about that? And we'll be looking at the chat and the comments. You can Twitter me at HipHughes and Tom for America. But let Tom introduce himself. Mr. Richey, why don't you take the floor and introduce yourself?
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Tom Richey. I've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tom Richey. Also, my website, tomrichey.net, at Tom Richey on Twitter. So if you're just trying to look for me, you know, no matter what it is, that's it. I teach AP Government, AP European History, AP US History. Some of you probably already seen some of the stuff that I did for those subjects. I also teach a little ancient history on the side. But, you know, now that all the history exams are over, HipHughes and I are going to kind of double back, and we're going to educate some people on AP Government. Really looking forward to being here tonight. Thanks for having me here, Hip.
Yeah, we're going to bang it out. Between both of our collective brains, we should be able to do you some justice, and we'll make you laugh a little bit too. And if we get real lucky, I've invited Mr. Betts, who plays some music videos, to come in and do like a little interlude to hang out with us. But we're going to get right to it because, guys, if anything, you know, many of you took APUSH. The U.S. history exam is, I think, much more kind of like content-based. These questions, I think, are a little bit more theoretical. They're harder sometimes to wrap your brain around. And the big push and the big problem for some of you kids out there is you got 60 questions in 45 minutes. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So you really have to be able to identify vocabulary and, like, out of those 5 answers, nail those easy ones as quickly as possible. And hopefully they'll all be easy. And then, of course, you have 4 free response essays, right? 4. Mr. Richey's nodding his head. 4. And out of that, right, you get to choose none because you have to do them all. So it's definitely a killer exam, but we're going to try and get you ready. So I'm going to start off with just some like really basic stuff for modern theories of government, guys. And the 3 big vocabs that I've used with my kids that I push through is going to be really pluralism, elite theory, and hyperpluralism. So I'm going to cover those really quick in a couple minutes, and then Mr. Richey's going to take over. But I'm going to remind you, if you go in the description below, you can pause us. This uploads. This will be here like forever. So if you want to hit playlists, whether it's Mr. Richey's videos or my playlist, you can get to those in the descriptions below. I know I have 70 or 80 AP government videos, so it's up to you to decide, because we like when kids decide. But here's the basic idea. When you ask most people, like, what kind of government is the United States of America? A lot of people are like, we're a democracy. Hey, not really. And what I always say is this kind of like, you know, real kind of Americana theory of government is pluralism. And many of you know Fed 10. We're going to talk about Fed 10 throughout the evening probably. But the major idea in, you know, Federalist paper number 10 is this idea that the only way to keep together a large republic is to work kind of with factions, not against them. Factions are special interest groups of people. So in pluralism, we have elements of a democracy. But when you look at our Constitution, there's a lot of indirect democracy, a lot of representational government through back channels, electoral college, or the way that senators were chosen, lifetime appointments for justices, yada, yada, yada. Really, in the original Constitution, only the House of Representatives is a real direct democracy button. So pluralism is this idea that through this system, these nuts and bolts of checks and balances and different participation methods to involve yourself in government and unwritten ways like lobbying, everybody's voice can be heard, and we can have a slow, deliberate process that protects individual rights of change. But it's not democracy. Elite theory just takes that to a level where really you're being a little bit suspicious when you look at it. And you're thinking that maybe it's more of kind of economics controlling things. And then we're not going to get too deep into it, but we'll look at elite theory and especially in special interests as we go through the evening. And then hyperpluralism. Get that word down, guys. I see it on the test all the time. Hyperpluralism is this theory that we have so many voices and money is so involved and we're so chopped up that we don't really hear clear voices anymore. It's hyperpluralistic. It's just a lot of voices that creates chaos and noise. So those are your major words. If you don't know pluralism, this idea of how our system allows for many voices, you should stay home, son. And definitely elite theory, we'll get our head around that a little bit more as we go through the evening, and hyper-pluralism are really the three big theories of government that we're going to be looking at on that exam. So, Mr. Richey, do you want to take it from there for a few minutes, talk a little bit about whatever you'd like?
Okay, you have kind of destroyed some of my notes here. It looks like we had a little sheet with some notes, and the ones I made earlier are kind of gone, but we'll figure that out. Okay, I don't have a chalkboard behind me here. So anyway, now one thing that somebody asked me to talk about tonight, I put a tweet out there the other day and just kind of asked people what they want to hear. One of the things that I got was Supreme Court vocabulary. Okay, so a few things about just some things you need to know about the Supreme Court. Now, first of all, a writ of certiorari, which my students would be like, writ of certiorari. My students that I taught like 3 years ago, and I did this for the first time, and we just kind of have fun with it, you know, certiorari. So it's a writ of certiorari. Now, what this is that the Supreme Court takes on the cases that it wants. All right, that's it. That the Supreme Court decides. Like, if it doesn't want to hear a case, it doesn't hear it. And if it grants a case, then it grants a writ of certiorari, which means, okay, come on in and you know, let's hear your case. And that sort of thing. Now, another thing, just a little side note about the federal judiciary, is speaking of the Supreme Court is the only court that is established by the Constitution. The rest of the courts are determined by Congress. So when we look at like the judicial circuits in the United States, let me go ahead and pull that up. All right, so our federal court system is divided into several judicial circuits, and let me see if I can get the, yeah, I've got something real easy here that I'm going to go ahead and pull up just so you can see it for all you visual learners out there. All right, so let's see what we've got here. All right, going to share that screen, and we see here that we've got 10 judicial circuits in the United States. Now, these are decided by the Congress. So like this big 9th judicial circuit, if Congress wanted to create an 11th judicial circuit out here, they could. And if they wanted to reduce the number of courts, if they wanted to combine the 6th and the 7th circuit, that is a power of Congress. And this is a pretty big power of Congress if you think about like the checks and balances and all that. And it's a way that Congress can sort of check the judiciary, theoretically at least, because Congress establishes all these courts, decides how many judges there will be, and all of that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. Now, another thing would be like constitutional interpretation. One word that you might see on your exam is originalism. Now, what originalism is this is where somebody, usually on the conservative wing of the court, somebody like Antonin and Scalia or somebody like that, and they believe, originalists believe, that the Constitution should be interpreted exactly as it was intended by the framers, according to the original intent. So if the language was, you know, if the intent was, you know, racist, sexist, you know, whatever, if it was behind the times, it's really up to the legislature to update that law, or it's up to the Congress and the states to amend the Constitution formally. Now, there are two schools of thought when it comes to amending the Constitution. Now, first of all, there is the formal amendment process, that being the process that is outlined in the Constitution, where 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states get together and they have an amendment. Now, the way that I describe this, because it's a process, one has to happen before the other. All right, so, you know, Keith's done this before, I've done this before, none of you've done this because you're in high school, but see, I'm taking a knee, all right? This is what Congress does. Congress, by vote of 2/3 of each house, proposes an amendment to the states. And then the states, then they consider, you know, the states are like, how big's that diamond? Let me take a look at it. Let me see if that's the ring I wanted or something like that. And it's the states who get to make the ultimate decision about the Constitution, about constitutional amendments. And the only way the states can ever like amend the Constitution proactively is through a convention of states, which has never happened. The states have to kind of get together and call that. But this is the process that's happened. Now, one thing that's kind of a consequence of that is since 2/3 of Congress has to approve any amendment to the Constitution, one thing that we've seen is there is an amendment for presidential term limits. There's never been an amendment for congressional term limits, and that probably will never happen. So the thing is, just keep in mind that there is originalism. That's where I was when I kind of went on that rabbit trail, but it was a useful one. So originalism, if it hasn't been formally amended, then it needs to be interpreted because of the original intent. Now, the other school of thought, where you would see like people of the more liberal wing, somebody like Justice Ginsburg or someone like that, thinks that of the Constitution as a living document, that the Constitution sort of kind of changes with the times and can be updated really by the judiciary. Now, conservatives would call this judicial activism, and this is something that also shows up on your exam. Remember, when we talk about the three branches of government, legislative makes the laws, executive enforces the laws, and then the judiciary branch, they are supposed to judge or interpret the laws. Now, judicial activism is when the judicial branch, when they start doing the work of the legislative branch, and where a judge has effectively written the laws. There was a case. Now, keep in mind, not all these cases will show up by name, but just to kind of give an example, Kennedy versus Louisiana in 2008, where the state of Louisiana, a jury had voted to execute a child molester. And the Supreme Court said that is invalid to have the death penalty for that crime. Now, the decision was not based in any kind of like U.S. law or U.S. precedent or anything like that. But Justice Kennedy, who wrote the opinion, said that they don't do it in other countries. So they were looking at international law. Now, the conservative wing of the court would say, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not originalism. But there are these differing schools of constitutional interpretation that are applied here. So you've got that, the writ of certiorari, you've got originalism, and there might have been a term or two that was up there earlier before my notes were destroyed. But I think I'm going to go ahead and pass this back to HipHughes for a bit, so he can tackle the next topic.
Well, I'll throw in just a couple of terms. I know one of them was amicus curiae. I think that was it.
Yes, that was one I had up there.
Right, friend of the court, that other parties that are interested in Supreme Court rulings or, in court cases can issue kind of like papers to the court, part of briefs, and that's called amicus curiae. But definitely Mr. Richey is, hitting the nail on the head when he's talking about you guys having to know the difference between really an original school of thought and a more flexible activist school of thought. And one of the kind of the linchpins of that is really that 14th Amendment and the concept of selective incorporation. But we're going to come back to that because I'm going to try to stick to some kind of order here. But selective incorporation is huge. And 14th Amendment, like if you want to watch a video, watch one about the 14th Amendment and then one about the 10th Amendment. And then you can just go to school. But if I kind of stick to the timeline and we're looking like a unit 2, kind of like a few weeks into your year, you're really looking at first making sure that you know what the Articles of Confederation is. Right? The Articles of Confederation, of course, is our first constitution that is born out of that colonial experience where we were like, we don't like power. Power's scary. So we created this federalistic constitution. Remember, the Articles of Confederation is federalism. Federalism is division of power between the feds and the states, because the states are creating a contract that creates this federal government, and they don't want another scenario where the federal government is controlling them. So when you look at the Articles of Confederation, you have to look through the lens of fear of tyranny, and then you see a very limited scope of a central government with very few powers, rightfully so, because they're afraid of that. And then, of course, we're racing forward because we can't explain all of this, but Shays' Rebellion becomes, if you're an elite theorist, as an opportunity for economic forces to gather around a new entity called the U.S. Constitution. And if you're more of a pluralistic guy or someone like that, you're just seeing it as an opportunity to make our Constitution better. But whatever you're talking about, you get into the U.S. Constitution, please know at least each section. Article 1, legislative power, right? If you go into Section 8, there's a laundry list that's called delegated powers. Really important that you understand that delegated powers are in the Constitution. We delegate powers to the federal government, like declaring war or dealing with pirates or whatever it might be. But knowing that concept of delegated power in the Constitution, and that idea that anything that's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, 10th Amendment, is reserved for the states, you have a little bit of a kick-butt essay brewing on your hands when you're talking about federalism. But if we stick to the Constitution, Article 1, legislative power. Article 2, make sure you get your executive power down. The different jobs of the president, whether he's the chief enforcer of law or he's the executive in terms of foreign affairs, kind of these big jobs are really important to understand about the president. And then, of course, Mr. Richey already talked about the judiciary. Article 3 is one of the smallest parts of the Constitution because they really don't get a lot to do. They have a couple original jurisdiction cases where they deal with like ambassadors and stuff like that. But for the most part, they're given a really light load. And like Mr. Richey said, only the Supreme Court is mentioned. The other courts are created by Congress. And of course, their power is derived almost from like a steroid they gave themselves, Marbury versus Madison. Watch that video if you got nothing to do with kitties, because if you don't know Marbury versus Madison and the importance of that court case, what were you doing? What were you doing this year? Where were you? Article 4, full faith and credit, right? Kind of the promise to the states. Article 5, Mr. Richey mentioned amendment procedure. Article 6, the supremacy clause about the words of the Constitution, delegated power being of the kind of, I don't know how to phrase it, but to be the law of the land. And of course, the 10th Amendment balances that out with reserved powers. And then, of course, we have ratification. But checks and balances, make sure you have a couple examples of that. But really big ideas about the Constitution being, I guess, what the founders thought was the perfect balance in federalism that would create this representational system to create balance, have elements of democracy, and have ourselves a country. Mr. Richey, why don't you take over for a little while?
All right. Now, just keep in mind that the point of this hangout is partly for us to kind of go over some things we'd already planned to go over. Part of it to take some questions off Twitter. My Twitter handle is @TomRichey. His is @HipHughes. You can go to me, to him, to both of us, whatever works for you. Now, as far as, some other stuff, though, that I want to turn you on to some resources, all right? I want this to be something, because you're probably not going to be through studying we broadcast. So, I mean, you're going to want to read some stuff possibly. You're going to want to binge watch. Odds are this falls like in between your exams, and it hasn't been one that you've had a great deal of time to prepare for, okay? So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and I want to show you a little collection that I've assembled. Keith, is this showing up okay?
Sure is.
Okay. Now, if you go to my website, tomrichey.net, and you can go to courses, AP Government and Politics, AP Government review videos. Okay, so I've created a bunch of review videos. Now, a lot of these are, are HipHughes videos, but I got a few things. Got Mr. Betts' class, What Does Locke Say? Then we've got hyperpluralism, elite theory, Federalist 10. I've got it sorted by the types of, by the sections of the exam. So constitutional underpinnings, which is 5 to 15% of the exam, but it's really critical that you know all this stuff because it's so broad. Now then, we go into party, political beliefs and behaviors. I've got one of my videos, one of Keith's videos, and then parties, interest groups, mass media. One of my videos, a HipHughes video, and then one that I found that was just pretty interesting, talking about why the NRA is such a powerful interest group, one of the most powerful in the country, in spite of having relatively small numbers. Then, if you look at this, institutions of national government, that makes up 35 to 45% of the exam. And that's got Congress, that's got so you've got Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, bit about the Supreme Court. And so HipHughes can take you through all of that stuff. Now, these videos are a little bit lengthier, it looks like, but keep in mind, a lot of the questions on the exam, and especially about the relationship between the Senate and the House, which is one of the things that we'll go over. Public policy. I've got one on iron triangles, and also I've got one by my friend Paul Sargent about how do interest groups affect policy. Paul's relatively new to YouTube, but I want to bring him to your attention because, Paul's been doing a great job. I would encourage you to subscribe to his channel. He does AP European history and AP government. So just a nice little thought for you. Paul Sargent. So another great new YouTuber out there. Of course, you probably heard of my friend HipHughes a time or two. So let me find out where I was again. And then civil rights and civil liberties. Now, if you're like, hey, I forget the fine details of some of these court cases. Now you can see that I've put a few of these HipHughes videos. Now there was one individual that asked me as far as what do we need to know, what court cases, the show field. Okay, I'm gonna turn you on to some court cases now. HipHughes has a little introduction to the Marshall Court. I've got one online. It's kind of old, but it's pretty comprehensive if you want to see that one. Then we've got the 14th Amendment, the incorporation doctrine, all that, and then a few things like Miranda v. Arizona, Gideon versus Wainwright, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, Showfield, what I want to show you is, now, excuse the bad PowerPoint. This one's kind of an old PowerPoint that I did several years ago. But I came up with Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 cases. And luckily for you, HipHughes has videos on most of these. Now, these so-called Tier 1 cases, these are cases that I've seen on multiple released exams. Now, I can about guarantee you that there's going to be a question about the Marshall Court. The Marshall Court, Marbury v. Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons v. Ogden. Now, that's if you look at that HipHughes video, that should be there. Dred Scott versus Sanford, Plessy v. Ferguson, and Brown v. Board, which you should know all of these from U.S. history. That's the beauty of this, that all of the things, like if you've taken U.S. history, which most of you have, you've gotten that overlap, and you've heard of these things in both a history and a government context. Miranda v. Arizona and Roe v. Wade, these are both very important decisions. And then there are some others, you know, such as Gideon v. Wainwright, which is a major case, although I just found it on one. But now keep in mind that it's not always critical that you know the names of the cases, although these Tier 1 cases, I would say so. On a lot of these, it's important that you understand like the impact for civil liberties. So it's not like it's going to be a big quiz on like, you know, what case did this or what case did this, but rather the, you know, the interpretation aspect and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of stuff on there if you go to my website, and I'm also going to showcase another resource. But if you look at the links, I've got a few resources there, you know, as far as helping you effectively binge watch tonight so that you are getting the right things. Of course, go to bed at a decent hour. But I'm also going to showcase some kind of enduring understandings that I have put in a sheet somewhere. Now, one thing that we might want to talk about, Keith, is to think about maybe campaign finance reform. Got a question about Josh here from like PACs and 527s and stuff like that. Do we want to go in that direction, or are we going to tackle something else first?
I'd like to hit federalism, but I would say that the major difference, because that's a multiple choice that's just repetitive, is kind of this idea that PACs or political action committees have more stringent guidelines. This is really before Citizens United, more stringent guidelines in terms of how they can fundraise, how much money they can fundraise, how much hard money they can fundraise. So because in a sense, it is like, you know, part of that entity or that corporation, and attaches itself to a candidate. The real big difference is that 527s, which is kind of this weird tax code, becomes a way before Citizens United for nonprofit groups to really create humongous ad campaigns and run them before the previous ban, which I think was 30 days before an actual election. So 527s couldn't endorse a candidate, but they could create really negative ads and spend a lot of money and kind of skirt the law of McCain-Feingold. It was really 527s is really like a wraparound of McCain-Feingold. But I think we'll come back to campaign finance, and I think that we should talk about Citizens United and really this idea. Mr. Richey and I were talking about this before, about, you know, the need for equality and access and for everyone's voice to be heard, and this idea of kind of freedom of speech. If you have money and you want to spend it, how can the government control that and say that you can't? Because it's an extension of their speech. Kind of, that's a big argument, but I'm going to stick to it. I'm a little bit, believe it or not, I'm being linear, and I'm very not linear in my life. But I'm going to be linear because I know that, you know, Mr. Richey is absolutely correct in everything that he is saying, because we could talk for like, you know, forever about everything on the test and we still wouldn't finish. So I'm going to try to stick to what I keep seeing in terms of free responses and multiple, you know, multiple choice coming up on the exam. And that would be, I'm going to do it right now, federalism. I'm just going to go over it as quickly as I can, because I mentioned it before, you know, being the defining characteristic of our government. Federalism is the division of power between the federal government and the states. And this concept is like interwoven through almost like every single public policy kind of concept that we have. And we're going to talk about iron triangles later. Elijah Drake. I lied. I said I was going to do that. But this idea of the federal government and what it has in terms of delegated power, and then interpretation in the elastic clause, which is linked to delegated power. But that's the big idea. And the 10th Amendment's reserved powers. So I'm going to go over the vocab that kind of takes you through the course. And really, you need dual federalism. Dual federalism is this idea. I'm going to use my hands. Right? Dual federalism, where you kind of have a circle and then you have an interlocking circle. You've seen this probably in your course. And you have, like I said, delegated power, and you have the 10th Amendment over here, state power, reserved powers, and then you have your concurrent or overlapping, that's the worst spelling ever, concurrent powers. These are humongous vocabulary words. Like, if you don't know those, you should punch yourself in the face. Metaphysically, of course. But the idea is, how do these circles change? Because they're probably not the same anymore. This is dual federalism, sometimes called constitutional federalism, how it's outlined in the original Constitution. But as we go through the course, my hand's going to be terrible. Look at that. As we go through the course, the circles begin to change, and definitely the federal government starts to eat up some of the power of the states, and that's when conservatives and original interpretationalists and people that are on the right of the aisle want to take that back, and that would be what's called devolution, or shrinking of the federal government. But your big vocab words are going to be, after dual federalism, you're going to want to get what's called layer cake federalism. Layer cake federalism is this idea that after Reconstruction, you have a larger scope of a federal government, but it is still being contained by the 10th Amendment. So layer cake would be federal power up here, state power down here, but the feds have more power after the Civil War. The central government, in a sense, has grown in its autonomous authority, but the states are still maintaining their system. They're still not being kind of controlled by the federal government in that sense. And then after layer cake, you get marble cake. Marble cake is where we're like at the New Deal. And the federal government starts to bleed through into the states through programs like the Tennessee Valley Authority or the CCC, or federal kind of programs that the states might run, but the money's coming from the federal government. So you get marble cake. You get an interwoven of powers in a sense. And then I can't do this anymore. And then really creative federalism, which is really liberalism and kind of this growth of the federal government, not only in how it's spending the money, but how the programs are being created. Medicare and Medicaid and housing and urban development and all of these kind of war on poverty types of creations, creative federalism. And then you're going to see a scale back after fiscal federalism. I'm not going to do fiscal federalism right now. It's too much for me to handle. But definitely knowing like block grants and competitive grants and kind of how that economic system works and that relationship about how the money goes from the feds to the states. But then really you want to make sure that you get the big idea of devolution. And devolution or new federalism would be kind of Reagan-era federalism, where you're trying to shrink the federal government and give states back more of their autonomy and their more power. So those are the big ones. You have to know dual federalism, layer cake, marble cake, creative, fiscal federalism, and new federalism. So those are really big ones. Why don't you go jump on that and listen to Mr. Richey, because I'm going to go get a glass of water.
All right. And as far as the new federalism, I think another great example would be the Welfare Reform Act that was signed by President Clinton in the 1990s. Now, if you think about like that Welfare Reform Act, what it did was keep in mind that there are two types of grants from the federal government. There are categorical grants. Now, that's categorical. It has to be in this category. The federal government is giving money to the state and saying you have to use it for this. All right. So if these are like Medicare dollars, Medicaid dollars, or something like that, you have to use it for this. And it has to be used in this way. It has to fit into this category. Now, then there are block grants, which I just think of like a big old block. And it's just a big old block of money that's given to the states to be spent in a very broad category. Now, the Welfare Reform Act that Bill Clinton signed, what it did was it loosened up restrictions and it gave states more leeway in how they would run their welfare program. So the thing is, it's like, here's the big block grant. It needs to be spent in the general category of social welfare, and you decide exactly how you would do it. So block grants give the states more flexibility. Now I'm going to do a little Q&A, but let me just, thank you for, Elijah and let's see, Mitchie, and let's see, Miguel and Cole World, okay? People that know how to use Twitter. Now, I'm getting more questions than I can answer. And, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. One of them followed me on Twitter. The other one didn't follow me on Twitter. I took the one that followed me on Twitter, and that made all the difference. All right. So keep that in mind, that the people who follow me, and those questions are getting priority. So I've got like little stars by people that I looked at, and these people actually are giving something back. So let me just take a quick look here, and we're going to go over some institutions and stuff, Miguel, but let me go ahead and take Cole World's question about congressional committees. Now, one of these things that we've got linked is I got my students to take the 2012 exam. And what I did was I got the questions that the most students missed, and we went over those questions, and I made a sheet of notes. Now, this does not have, I don't need any teachers freaking out. This does not have any questions on it. All it is a list of enduring understandings that I got from these questions, as far as what are these questions assessing that students need to know. And so what I've got here, a lot of people are in this Google document right now. Now, first of all, make sure you read every item. There was one question on that exam that item 1 looked so appetizing that a lot of people just took a bite out of it. But let me go ahead and screen share with you. I forgot to do that a second ago. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do a quick little screen share. And let's see what we've got. Congressional committees. Now, first of all, there are standing committees. All right, so standing committees, these are committees that always exist. All right, so a standing committee always exists. They never go away. All right, so that's just part of it. An ad hoc committee. This is a committee, it means in Latin for this. So anytime you see an ad hoc committee, it exists for a certain purpose, and it's something that's going to go away at a certain point. Then there are select committees, which really aren't all that much different from ad hoc committees, but these are put together to investigate something for a special purpose, such as Watergate or 9/11 or something like that. They'll have a select committee, and a lot of times it's investigative. Now, another thing, this will get assessed in some form or fashion, conference committees. These are put together to reconcile differing versions of bills passed by the House and the Senate. Keep in mind, for a bill to become a law, and when we look at the legislative process, I've had a few questions about that. When we think about the legislative process, then we're thinking about, the Senate has to pass something, the House has to pass something, and they have to be the same bill. So if the House passes a version, the Senate passes a version, then they get together and they have to conference, and they have to come up with the same bill, and then it has to go through both chambers again. Unless it's Obamacare, then they've got like something real creative they did with that. But then after the Senate and the House both have their own versions that they pass, then it goes to the president, and the president gives his signature. Now, thinking about checks and balances, the most effective check and balance that probably exists is the veto, because the president can veto this legislation, and it can only be overridden by a 2/3 vote of both houses, which very rarely happens. When you look back at U.S. history, at least 90% of presidential vetoes are sustained. So make sure, the presidential veto is a very, very effective check on the legislative. So Cole World, thank you for that question. Now, as far as the bureaucracy, okay, Team Louie, who has been a devoted follower for a while. All right, One Direction for the win, or whatever. All right, it's one of those people, those directioners are like, they don't say who they are on Twitter or anything. They're just like, oh, I'm all about One Direction or something. But anyway, what we've got, the federal bureaucracy. Okay, the bureaucracy, this is really like the system of, like, we think about like the president and Congress and the judiciary. The bureaucracy is everything that exists, like, to kind of keep the government working. So you think about like the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, and all of that stuff. That you have the bureaucracy, they set rules and all of that kind of stuff. They set like regulations and that sort of thing. Oh, I see a triangle there. I wonder if that's an iron triangle. I think it is. Y'all are in for a treat in a little bit. Okay, so yeah, see, give you a quick little sneak preview of this guy over here. Look at that. Oh, it is an iron triangle. Y'all get ready. All right, so that's the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is one of those things you're just gonna have to wrap your brain around it on your own. But that's essentially what it is. Now, as far as linkage institutions, I've actually just now made a brand new PowerPoint on this that I can just show off a short version real quick. Okay, I can make this. I've got it on SlideShare. If you go to slideshare.net. And I just put this up. I tweeted about it, I think yesterday when I finished it. Meant to make a video, but that just didn't quite happen. A little Game of Thrones got in the way there, as it often does. And so if you go here, linkage institutions. All right, and like I said, I like to visualize things, so I'm going to just go ahead and kind of put this here in front of you. And as far as this goes, the linkage institutions. Now, these institutions, keep in mind, we're in a democratic republic. We don't have time, okay? Like the Athenians had time for direct democracy. We don't have that kind of time. We've got a busy schedule. And so what happens is we need something to link us with the government. I'm too busy teaching and, you know, all that kind of stuff to really keep up what's going on. So linkage institutions come in. Now, the 4 linkage institutions, first of all, elections. That gives us a direct link with the government. Then the media lets us know what's going on. Political parties. This is how we can kind of, you know, we can build coalitions with people who in general think the same way we do. Now, of course, we kind of get into like 2 camps, but nearly everyone prefers one party or the other. I've got a video about that. If you put in party identification, you can look at the website I posted. I've got it there. Or you can just put in party identification on YouTube. Because when it comes down to it, although about 1/3 of Americans claim to be independent, when it comes down to it, nearly every American has a preference for one of the major parties or another. And then finally, interest groups. Okay, so those are your 4 linkage institutions: elections, the media, interest group, parties. And elections, we influence the government, but we don't know enough about the government. So as far as how we participate, the media lets us know what's going on. Political parties help us to build coalitions with people, also help us recruit candidates. And they have a brand, like a party has a certain brand. You think about Democrats as being this, Republicans as being this. Interest groups, single issue advocacy, and also a way for us to raise money, whether you like guns, whether you are a member of a labor union, maybe you are a teacher or something like that. You care about education issues. So that's what interest groups do. So that's really just a quick little summary of linkage institutions, and hopefully that was helpful to Team Louis there. Let's see if I can tackle maybe one more. As far as Brandon, I would say the Bill of Rights, which one of the videos I've got linked, you know, Keith Hughes, HipHughes History, he's going through the first 10 amendments very, very quickly and giving you those. Also the 14th Amendment, which we're going to talk about some court cases, I'm sure, and the whole idea of how the 14th Amendment fundamentally changed the Constitution by, as the court sees it, allowing the court to selectively incorporate the 14th Amendment and apply it to the states as well. Okay, and I think that Hip Hughes is ready over there to talk about some iron triangles.
Yeah, we have so many questions, guys. It's unbelievable. But back to like Team Louis and talking about kind of bureaucracies, and there was more than a few of you that brought that up. I just want to give you like maybe a couple of really clear examples of an iron triangle, and then that'll help you not only with bureaucracies, but also congressional committees and how they work, and also special interests. But definitely get the stupid vocab down. If you don't get the vocab down, if you can't draw the iron triangle, then I don't know, you should beat yourself up with it. So this represents like the interlocking relationship that creates public policy. Some of you were mentioning that. It's like, how do we get public policy? And there's that how a bill becomes a law story. And, you know, I have a video on that. Everyone's got a video on that. You watch the stupid Schoolhouse Rocks kind of idea. But that's important, understanding kind of the levels that it goes up. But really, we're talking about what goes on beyond the scenes. What's like the unwritten way that things really happen? Oh, how does government work? So this is kind of like part of elite theory too. People that complain about how democracy doesn't always translate into public policy that represents what people want. Because really, back to Fed 10, I keep saying Fed 10 and factions. The idea is that this special interest part of the iron triangle is the people. Because if you take an issue, I'll take something like Keystone, like creating this pipeline, you know, from the Gulf of Mexico or Louisiana up through into Canada and the tar sands, or however that works. I'm not a scientist, but there are definitely two different interest groups. You have oil interest groups like ExxonMobil and these huge conglomerates that create, their own lobby army that go to Washington with one job: get a bill that allows them to make the pipeline. But you also have environmental special interest groups. So you have like the National Defense Fund or Greenpeace or whatever it might be, and they're bringing an army of lobbyists, and they're all doing the same thing. They're lobbying the congressional committees, and that might mean like, how about a cup of coffee and come play golf with me in Utopia for free. Or it could be, funneling campaign cash. That could be through a 527 group or through hard money, PACs, raising it that way, or however it is. It's really sending influence and money towards Congress to get them to churn out what they want, the people. And it is the people. These are real people. Corporations are people. Of course they're people. And so is Greenpeace and all those other groups. But a lot of people on the other side would complain that you need money to be effective here. And people with money have money. So whatever. So the idea is that once you pass public policy, it's that bureaucracy that is going to enforce and spend that money. So in this case, it would be the Department of Energy, and they're influencing each other. They might quicken up environmental inspections to get it built quicker, or they might stumble and say we need to do more studies. But either way, there's a relationship between all three that creates public policy. So one more issue, you can always talk about why is it so darn hard to touch anything with old people, right? You're like, let's reform Social Security. An army of old people are going to rip your limbs off and feed them to your future children, because the APPR is one of the strongest lobbies in the United States. So they, and old people vote, right? Demographics, they're like the most voters are old people. So they're going to influence not only through electing people to that congressional committee, but the APPR is going to funnel money into their campaigns. And then the Social Security Administration, they don't want to reform themselves. So they have a vested interest in this and working with those committees and those special interest groups to create an iron triangle that won't let you freaking touch Medicare or Social Security. So iron triangles are really, really important that you know what they are. I'm going to throw one other word at you just because somebody else asked, and that's gerrymandering, because it's like my favorite word to say. Gerrymandering. It sounds vulgar, doesn't it? Gerrymandering, and I'm just going to give you a straight definition and get a glass of water because I'm sweating like a pig man. But gerrymandering is this concept that state legislatures create their congressional district lines, right? So let's say California, I don't know how many districts they have like 52 districts. Or Texas might have, 45. New York has 34, whatever the numbers might be. And every 10 years we have a census. That's going to be on the exam, a census. Why do we have a census? To count the population in the state so we can figure out the representation. What's the pop for the rep, baby? Population for representation. But gerrymandering becomes this process where the state legislature is drawing the lines in a way that are going to benefit the political party that is sitting in that chamber drawing those lines. And they're going to use demographics and ethnic groups and splitting different communities up to create, on both sides of the aisle, both the Republicans and the Democrats do this, crazy districts like cray-cray. Like the lines are all like from the future all over the place. It looks like a rave that's falling apart. Because they're trying to trap all Republicans in this district, in this district, in this district, and split the Democrats up. So they're getting over-representation. That's not a word. They're getting their political party more seats. So if you take Texas or something like that, where they might have, I forget what it is, but something like 35 House seats or something like that, and they might have 25 that are Republicans and 10 that are Democrats. But when you poll people, it's probably more like 60-40. But that works in other states as well. Gerrymandering is an important vocabulary word. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Richey. Mr. Richey, go cover something else because this is crazy.
All right. Sounds good, man. All right. So the thing is, he's already kind of gone over reapportionment, which reapportionment is when Congress says, okay, the states will get this much. Now, as far as this goes, keep in mind that there's been a lot of, a lot of movement where you see people in the Sun Belt and such, in the Southeast, the Southwest. A lot of people are asking me to go over FRQs. Okay, now as far as the way this goes, the AP government exam, it's got some really easy multiple choice questions. All right. So if you've taken an AP history exam, these multiple choice questions are generally easier. And par for the course on a history exam, like at least the old style with 80 questions, if you got the majority of the questions right, you were good. Now, this really par for the course is about 40 out of 60. And you want to get a strong showing on the multiple choice because the FRQs can be a little bit unpredictable. Now the thing is, you need to pick the ones. Now, keep in mind that they're set up to where you've got a number. And then it's like A, B, C, sometimes maybe A, B, C, or D, but typically A, B, and C. And what I would say is tackle each task on its own because each particular task is graded on its own. So say A, answer A, then skip a line, answer B. Now, don't skip a line between all of your lines. So, but just answer A, skip a line, then go to answer B. And don't give them more than what they're asking for, okay? It's like if they ask you for an example and you give them 2 examples, it's not going to help you, okay? Because they've got a checklist. And I don't know if any of you have ever graded these before. I actually get my students to grade, each other's with, anonymous information, that sort of thing. So, so they get the feel of it. But really, every one of those lettered tasks is being graded by itself. So if you can do A and B, but not C, that's okay. And keep in mind when you look at like the AP government scores, there's a trend that the multiple choice is typically like people do better on that than the FRQs. But with the FRQs, the other thing is they give you plenty of time. If you've taken an AP history exam, it's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to write these essays in the time that I have? Odds are for AP government, they give you 25 minutes per FRQ, which you really don't need. So it's not like you're going to be in a big rush to finish the FRQs, but that's the thing. They bring something up and there are going to be 4 of them. And they're going to cover 4 different areas. And if you bomb one, there are 4 of them. So just don't panic. Don't spend too much time on one. Treat every task as an individual task. So don't look at it necessarily as like 4 FRQs, but look at it as like 12 individual questions that you have to answer. Now, use complete sentences. Don't like just list up. Use complete sentences, talk intelligently, but really nothing should count on you doing something like more than what it's asking for. Also, keep in mind the words, the task, okay? Because like define is pretty low down on, Bloom's taxonomy. Then you start to think about like explain or something like that. So is it asking you to define? Is it asking you to explain? What is it asking you to do? And typically it's going to want you to give an example. And that's why sometimes it's not like you need to know a particular court case for a question, but knowing particular court cases is going to help you in this. Because now the other thing sometimes will be the name of the court case, maybe the substance. So if you know the substance of the court case, but if you don't know the name, put the substance, because those tasks are typically, they're graded out of like 2 points. Like each task will say, well, they'll get a point if they did this and another point if they did this. So what it is, it's almost like a checklist where you're really trying to score as many points as you can. So I hope that that's just good as far as a general guideline for FRQs. You can let me know if there's something that you might not have, necessarily done. Now, Claudia, public policy would be kind of tough to go over, but it's really just, it's the whole process by which the law happens, okay? And that involves all of those linkage institutions. How is policy made? So how do interest groups work toward that? How do political parties work toward that? And the thing is I think that HipHughes was saying some things that were useful as far as government doesn't always necessarily act in the interest of the majority or do what's best. Like, for example, if you look at ethanol, it's like, ethanol doesn't make your your fuel any more efficient. It doesn't necessarily even save resources. Why is that there? Well, because the farmers' lobbies and that sort of thing. I mean, it's like, hey, if I can get paid by the government to grow corn, and even if that makes the fuel less efficient, do I care? No, I want my stuff. And you look at like, well, the farmers' lobby. Then it's like, okay, well, why do we have such? You might think that we don't have enough gun control or something like that. Why is that? The NRA. Okay, so you look at how the interplay between interest groups and parties and all of that, and how that goes into the policy making process. So that's something where, now the thing is, we do need to talk about like campaign finance reform and that sort of thing. And I'll kind of follow Keith's lead there. I'm thinking that what we've got there, oh, all right, he's about to lay some court cases on us. And Keith, you're looking ready over there.
Yeah, but maybe if you can get ready to kill a little bit of campaign finance reform, and I know them knowing, obviously, McCain-Feingold and Citizens United is really important. So I'll lay that at your electronic doorstep, Mr. Richey, because I want to go over selective incorporation. And I mean, there's too many court cases to go over. I mean, when I taught AP Gov, we did like 40 or 50 court cases. It was ridiculous. So if I could only go over a couple, but mainly the big concept. And what I'll tell you is, I have a court playlist. There's like 50 court cases I've done, and you can check out whatever you want. Do whatever you want. I don't even care. But you better subscribe. What are you doing watching, not subscribing? Shame on you. I just electronically shamed you. So what I want to do is I want to go over selective incorporation because I know it's on the exam and I've seen it as a free response question. So I'll just try to explain it the best I can. Early on, you have this creation, of course, of judicial review through Marbury versus Madison, the famous midnight judges cases, which is really going to make that court bigger than it was in the Constitution. It's going to allow them to be a referee, right? In a sense, we all back then, I guess, agreed we need a referee. If Congress is making the laws and the president's enforcing the laws, like who's checking that process other than what? If you pass a law and the president signs it, that you get to, I don't know, chop everybody with red hair's head off? How do you stop that? You need a referee to come in and say, stop that. So that's kind of that concept of judicial review. So of course, your big kind of, Mr. Richey mentioned this before, but your Marshall court cases, I always call them John Schwarzenegger Marshall. Those court cases that gave the federal government strength. And of course, you have McCulloch versus Maryland and kind of that idea of the national bank and the elastic clause being used to really interpret in a way how we were enacting a delegated power. It doesn't say national bank in Article 1, Section 8, but it does talk about kind of coining money and regulating money and giving that financial power to Congress. So the court is interpreting, or not interpreting, it's giving Congress the ability to interpret how do we enact that delegated power by creating this entity of the national bank to do it. And then, of course, states' rights advocates are going, how can you do that? It's not in the Constitution. It's tough about it. What are you doing? Great. And we're using the elastic clause to interpret. So that would be federal judicial power, giving the federal government more power. And then Gibbons versus Ogden, kind of this use of interstate commerce clause, which has come back over and over and over again. The New Deal and even Obamacare, kind of talking about how when something transfers through state lines, it suddenly gives Congress the ability to regulate that commerce, giving the federal government more power, or at least that's how some people view it. But the big idea of the 14th Amendment and selective incorporation, because if you don't get this one, I don't even know what to say to you. I always used to explain it this way, that in a sense, the Bill of Rights is written to protect the states against the federal government, not against themselves. Not against themselves. It's just not. We have state constitutions for that. That's how a republic works, children. But after the 14th Amendment, and you got to just memorize the stupid phraseology. I mean, what are you doing? What else you got to do? No state shall deny its citizens equal protection under the law and due process, right? I'm paraphrasing. But those two concepts, no state shall deny its citizens equality under the law, due process. Everyone's treated the same. That's the concept, right? And of course, this is written for who, children? It's written for freed slaves, African Americans, to protect them against their own states. That's the concept. So when we get this court case in the 1880s called the slaughterhouse cases, right? The slaughterhouse cases is where basically a corporation goes to the federal government and says, hey, the state is taking some of my land here, and it's not fair. No state shall deny its citizens my rights. What are you doing taking my land? And what the court says is, who the hell are you talking to? You're not an African-American ex-slave. That's not for you, silly goose. So then when Plessy comes, so basically that's a denial of selective incorporation. We're not going to use the 14th for anything but the concept of helping black people. And then of course, you know, Plessy versus Ferguson, that's just kind of an ironic twist on the whole situation because they don't do that at all, do they, kids? But in 1925, we get the first instance of selective incorporation. Listen to the word, selective incorporation. Think of, like, you know that stupid crane game you play in the stupid supermarket where you put a quarter in and you go, and the crane goes, and you try to win like the doll? That's kind of selective incorporation. So Gitlow, it's kind of like a Schenck court case. You have a protester and he's a socialist and he's in New York and he's yelling bloody murder and they arrest him and he says freedom of speech. And when they say no dice, you're going to jail, he says no state, New York, shall deny me, a socialist, equal protection under the law, due process, freedom of speech. What are you doing, New York? And the court for the first time says, yeah, we're going to use that 14th Amendment clause to selectively incorporate that First Amendment freedom of speech to all the children across the land. That's the idea of selective incorporation. In a sense, we're selectively picking out some of the Bill of Rights to nationalize. Because remember, the Bill of Rights is a shield against your state, against the federal government. Now it's a shield against your state. That's why you have all of these state court cases. Mapp versus Ohio, that dirty little old lady court case, where Miss Mapp basically is saying, you can't search my premises without a good warrant. I don't care if you found dirty pictures in my basement. None of your business. You didn't have a warrant. And the court says, new rule, exclusionary rule. From now on, if you don't have a warrant, we exclude the evidence. That's selective incorporation. They're selectively incorporating that Fourth Amendment concept of search warrants with a new rule. Mr. Richey pointed it out before. That's an activist court. The legislature didn't write that rule. Nobody wrote that rule, but the Supreme Court, when they interpreted the amendment using the 14th Amendment. So get selective incorporation down. There's other ones. I mean, my goodness gracious, we could talk to the cows come home. I think I hear a cow. Mr. Richey, what do you think?
No. All right, I petted a cow last week. It was pretty cool. On my Instagram. Yeah, it's pretty, like you go up to the fence and they'll like come up to you and like do that. You'll have to see the video at Tom Richey.
I saw the video.
I'm at Tom Richey everywhere. The thing is, Jefferson would have been very proud. Jefferson, strict constructionist. All right, so so the thing is, I've got a lot of stuff going on here that we've got to kind of catch up on. Appreciate all the stuff. I'm trying to respond to some people on Twitter here and there. You know, let's see. Sierra, I got your tweet. I would say talk to your classmates and also look at this thing that I've shared in the video. If you look down, keep in mind I've got some resources. Those of you who tuned in recently, just make sure that you see there's a link to my website, and there's a particular page on the website that's got AP review videos, also HipHughes. Subscribe. Yes, he's pointing downward. Just look at that stuff below the video, and we've got stuff on there. Now, first thing I've got is I've got something with videos. Like some of you are asking me questions that HipHughes already has some videos about. We're not trying to tread ground that's already been trod. So when you're asking me, hey, what are the general powers of each branch of government? HipHughes has a video on each one of those already. So it's like, you know, we're not in this necessarily to repeat ourselves. So sometimes I'm going to refer you to that stuff. Another thing is that sheet that I gave you that's just got several enduring understandings that I just pointed out from taking an AP practice exam. So all of that stuff is very important. Just keep in mind that look and see what videos are there and all of that kind of stuff. Now, let me see if I've got a few things here as far as that goes. You know, Heather, Article 1 and Article 3 courts, not sure what you're talking about there. Now, Article 3 is the federal judiciary. Oh, my goodness. Tal, this is one of my favorite. Tal, who's following now. All right. And one of my favorite videos, and I think I've got this linked on the website. If you put in the Federalist Papers. All right. So back about a year and a half ago, I had maybe 150 subscribers. Like, I thought I was so awesome. And, you know, this guy, you know, HipHughes has got thousands of subscribers. He liked one of my videos and tweeted it, and he said, hey, how would you like to do a video? And I was like, yeah. All right. So, you know, he puts me on this video. So this was like, I ended up like doubling my subscriber count. So it's almost like you're holding a penny, pick up another penny or something like that. But that was kind of the first major break for my channel. So if you take a look at that video we've got on the Federalist Papers, it would just warm my heart. Okay, all you have to do is go to YouTube and just put in, come on, wait for it. All right, if you just put in Federalist Papers, the Federalist Papers explains, special guest, yours truly, and that was an awesome experience. Now, keep in mind that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, that's pretty important stuff there as far as that goes. And I've got a video on that page about the Anti-Federalists. So you can look at the Federalist Papers, which was like, hey, the Constitution's not so bad. You know, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, it's not so bad. You know, it's not going to create a monarchy or whatever. And then the Anti-Federalists have their kind of thing. Of course, they end up compromising on the Bill of Rights. So that's something that's important there. The last unit in public policy, right? You know, and keep in mind, public policy is one of those things I've already kind of described in general what that is. In a short hangout like this, like we can't really teach a whole unit as much as I'd love to, Now, the checks and balances, Lexi, you know, that's something that's pretty easy to look up. Now, a few things, you know, I've mentioned the veto already. Another thing is that, you know, every federal judge has to be nominated by the president and approved by the Senate. Now, keep in mind, the U.S. Senate, they've got the power to approve presidential nominees. They've got the power to ratify treaties. Now, that's by a 2/3 vote. I saw a question about like executive agreements and that sort of thing. Executive agreement is just when the president makes like a kind of quasi-binding agreement with another president. It's almost like an executive order on an international level, whereas a treaty is ratified by the Senate, and a future president can't just say, okay, well, I'm taking back that executive agreement or something like that. So keep in mind, that's another check and a balance. Now, as far as oversight, okay, so oversight. Now, keep in mind that the legislative branch makes laws, then pass them on the executive branch to enforce laws or carry them out. Oversight is when Congress forms committees. Each house has an oversight committee, and they bring people in. Like lately, you've had that IRS scandal where the IRS was targeting right-wing groups, and of course, the House has a Republican majority, so they're pretty ticked about this. And they've had this woman from the IRS in, and it's like, you know, oh, that hard drive, don't know what happened to that. That's oversight, okay, where the Congress is trying to make sure that the executive branch is implementing legislation the way it was meant to be implemented, and that there's not corruption. And if they find corruption, they may go on to impeachment or something like that. Now, you know, HipHughes wanted me to talk about, you know, campaign finance and that sort of thing. Also, 05/27, all right, is following. Gosh, looks like somebody's yeah, who is that? Is that, yeah, some basketball players or something. Okay, yeah, Dirk, whatever it is on the Mavericks. Okay, like some basketball. Now, asking me to go over campaign finance. Okay, now keep in mind that we've got restrictions in this country about, you know, how much you can give money to like a certain candidate or a certain thing or something like that. Now, on the other side, we've also got the First Amendment, you know, that I can say whatever I want. And the Supreme Court has kind of extended speech. You know, I mean, speech also includes art. Like, you know, the Supreme Court has even, you know, defined, like, you know, strictly speaking, like pornography as speech. Now, you know, also speech includes how I spend my money. Okay, so for example, if I give money to the teachers union, or I give money to the NRA or something like that, I'm speaking. Keep in mind, that's how I can speak. I don't have time as a citizen to get involved in the government. I'm too busy. So instead, I speak through my money. So how much of that is speech and how much is it that can be regulated? Like, you know, for example, you run into, you know, a movie theater, you yell fire, that's not covered. And so to what extent can the government keep you from giving, like, you know, to candidates, that sort of thing? So the government has limits, for example, on how much you can give to a certain candidate. And campaign finance reform, okay, this was in 2002, McCain-Feingold was passed. Now, McCain-Feingold is something that you're likely to see, and this was formerly called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Let me go ahead and stop this real quick. I just want to make sure I'm going to go ahead and put it in HD. since I'm sharing a screen because I want it to make it easier for you to read, okay? So when we're sharing the screen here, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, all right? So what it is there's, you know, soft money in campaign financing, okay? So what soft money, the financing of electoral campaigns, this is where it's kind of like, this isn't coming from the candidate themselves, okay? This kind of stuff's filtering through interest groups and all that kind of stuff, issue advocacy and all of that. So what we see here is that, you know, I mean, political parties don't have limits, okay? Like I can give however much I want to a union or a political party or something like that. And the thing is that the incumbents, now some people call the Campaign Finance Reform Act, you know, McCain-Feingold, I heard it called before the Incumbent Protection Act, because what you see here is a lot of interest groups, they would run ads against a candidate within 30 days of the election or 60 days or whatever. And so what happened here, this is, you know, what McCain-Feingold did is it told like some of these interest groups, like you can't name the candidate within like 30 days or 60 days, depending on what election. So you can't run like a smear ad against a candidate. And that's McCain-Feingold. Now, the thing is that there are interest groups such as Citizens United, okay, which HipHughes has a, you know, HipHughes has a video about the Citizens United case. And Citizens United is a, I believe, like a right-leaning interest group, if I'm not mistaken. And what they had to say was, look, we should be able to, I mean, if we can't attack someone, okay, like we can't run an attack ad against a candidate within this many days of the election, then that is a violation of our freedom of speech. And then if we can't spend as much money as we want to advocate our issue, that is stifling our speech. And the Supreme Court heard this argument. The Supreme Court said, well, you know what? You're right to a point, okay? So what we're going to do is that you can't stop you know, you can't stop an interest group or a PAC or somebody like that from naming a candidate. Now, of course, there are some cases like what the Supreme Court did not shoot down was individual contributions to a candidate. There are still limits on that. The Supreme Court upheld individual contributions to a candidate. Now, keep in mind, if you're using your own money, you can spend as much as you want, but if you're giving to a candidate, there's a limit. Now, so what happened here is that super PACs, now you've got PACs, political action committees. Now PACs a lot of times are organized by a particular candidate or, you know, for a candidate or for an issue or something like that. And if a PAC is in any way coordinating with a candidate, they can only raise a certain amount of money, can only spend a certain amount of money. But then as a result of Citizens United, you have these super PACs, okay? HipHughes was Superman last week. I've got my Batman mask. So it's like, I mean, if you think about it, like you put on that Batman mask and you just get so much cooler and more powerful. All right, so a super PAC is like, wow, it's like a superhero PAC. And I can spend as much money as I want, okay? And nobody can tell me what to do because I can speak freely because this is America. All right, so the super PAC can spend as much as they want. But the thing is, they can't coordinate. So I can't talk to people from a campaign. Now I can run stuff that's beneficial, and then I can also, like, if I'm running a campaign, I can make sure that the picture I put up is a high resolution photo, and I put that on the internet so that the super PAC can get that high resolution photo off my website so that I don't have to send it to them. All right, there was also a situation where there were some GOP types that were tweeting poll numbers, and they were tweeting them kind of in a code or something, but since they were tweeting them, then it was public communication. I think there's going to be a court case about that. But essentially, as long as you are not directly communicating with that campaign, then you're free to spend as much money as you want. You can run whatever ads you want and all of that stuff. So that's really, Citizens United pretty much gutted McCain-Feingold, which, you know, kind of continues to be, you know, which is really not operable. Now, sort of what we might talk about the Civil Rights Act, Keith, I don't know, but kind of like the Supreme Court, you know, kind of gutted the Civil Rights Act of 1965 to a certain extent. But I think we're about time to pass this sucker back to HipHughes.
All right, guys. Yeah, definitely boil it down, man. Super PACs, get all that good stuff down. I forget how much last election was. It almost $1 trillion they spent, or they're going to spend $1 trillion in the next election. So Money is freedom. There we go. What I would like to do is, I'm going to throw that out. Someone's been tweeting that all night. What the heck is the 1974 Congressional Budgetary and Endowment Act? How about that for a tongue twister? That's no fun vocabulary. All I would do is, I would say is that really anything that you get in the 1970s, especially around like the mid 70s, has something to do with about reducing executive authority. Because, you know, that's right around Watergate. Nixon's just left. So you have kind of this sweeping in of democratic forces that are trying to bring congressional power back from what they see as its traditional place. That's why, you know, Nixon's called the imperial president, because he expanded the role of the executive branch. And now Congress is like, me want back power. So that's really creating standing committees for budgetary oversight in the House and the Senate. But just see it when you hear it. You know, Congressional Budgetary and Empowerment Act, I want my power back. Maybe you should say it like that, like a pirate, but you'll definitely get the question right. But I definitely know that anything that you get, like right around the 1970s, mid 70s, before the end of, you know, before inflation, but after Watergate, is definitely has something to do with Watergate, with you know, limiting executive power. I wanted to talk about like political parties and kind of just some big elections, because I know that's big on free response, that you need specific elections. And this concept of really kind of like realignment and de-alignment. So I'm going to speed myself through that. You know, Richie's better switching the screens. I get confused. I'm a little older than Richie, so maybe we get a little senile or something. But I go to do the windows and I get lost. And I teach technology, for goodness sake. What are you going to do? But I think I can kind of shoot it out. You know, you definitely should know the political party kind of system in terms of how it's evolved. And Mr. Richey made mention before to the feds and the anti-feds. And of course, that's kind of like party system one. The Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, right? This kind of Jeffersonian way of viewing things, and this federalistic way, or federal party way of viewing things. And then you kind of go into phase two, where really you have the Democratic Republicans and, you know, kind of like the Democratic Party, Democratic Republicans kind of rule the day for a little while. And then you have like the formation of the Whigs, right? And the Whigs, and now I'm messing up. I can feel myself messing up. But before that, the development of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Republicans become the Democrats. That's that Southern party. And you get this Whig party, which is like a national unity party. But really, by 1860, we're done with all of that nonsense. And we really have the two political party system that's going to go through changes, but that is that Democratic Party of Jackson and the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, kind of a northern national government, but limited government in terms of economic stuff with subsidies, of course, and more of a southern states' rights Democratic Party. So the big elections that I would watch out for when you're talking about alignment and de-alignment. Well, first of all, what does alignment mean? Alignment means where me, a voter, where do I align myself? Which political party am I sticking with? And then you get demographics out of that, of course. I have a funny video with Susie Sampson. It's pretty funny. But we talk about demographics, not stereotypes, but looking at different breakdowns of people and how people vote. Like we talked about it before. Older people vote more than younger people. Younger people vote Democratic more than Republican. They're generally more liberal. The older you get, the more conservative you get. African Americans vote more liberal than conservative, right? Women are a little bit more Democrat than Republican. Men the other way around. Tall people, no, I'm just joking. But that's kind of demographic. So when we look at two big elections, we're looking at realignment, de-alignment and realignment. De-alignment is when I belong to a political party, like this is a political party, right? And I belong to it, like that. So for instance, let's say I'm an African American, right? What am I in 1865? Right? I'm a Republican. I like the party of the North because they're fighting for my rights, right? Military occupation, whatever. So I stick with that Republican Party. I've aligned with it, right? When do I de-align with the Republican Party? When do I start going, I don't know, I don't want to stick with these guys anymore? Maybe it starts around the Progressive Era, but definitely by 1932, as an African American, unemployed, you know, living in Tennessee Valley, looking for a job, the Democrats are saying over here, we'll help you, we'll help you. So I de-align from the Republican Party and I realign to be a Democrat. And the 1932 election is a humongous realignment election because FDR's New Deal is offering so many different types of different people, different things, except for maybe, I don't know, bankers or businessmen in the North. So that's a huge realignment election. And now stick with me because I'm just going to do one more and then I'll turn it back to Richie. But you having 2 elections is priceless. Like knowing that concept of 1932 and how African Americans are de-aligning and realigning with the Democratic Party, that's pretty sweet right there. So the other one that I would do would be 1980. So let's stick with this concept of the Democratic Party, right? It's really just fish food, whatever. This is the Democratic Party, and I'm a white, poor, Southern farmer, right? Who am I in 1932? I'm a Democrat. I got a job with the TVA or the AAA hooked me up and paid me not to grow crops or whatever it is. I like the Democratic Party. And then what happens starting, let's say, the 1960s and 70s? What does the Democratic Party start focusing on domestically, right? They start focusing on civil rights. And I'm not calling this piece of chalk racist or anything like that, but that's maybe not in my party platform. I might want segregation, to be honest with you. So when the Dixiecrats formulate in the 1960s, or the late 1950s, I start de-aligning with the Democratic Party. I don't know if I want to be a Democratic anymore. And I kind of swirl around for about a decade. I used to call third parties elevators because that Dixiecrat party is transferring me from one party to another party. I'm just waiting for one of the 2 major parties to get my vote back. Maybe it's the Democrats. Maybe they come up with a new position that realigns me, but it's not. It's really Nixon, but later to 1980, big time Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan says to that farmer and that blue collar worker, something's wrong in America. We have to get back to our values, back to our roots, back to where we were as a people. And suddenly I'm like, I like how that sounds. And I align with the Republican Party starting in 1980. That's how you win big elections. It's not just winning the vote of the day. It's winning a group of people for a decade. So realignment and de-alignment are huge. And knowing that basic party system of how we come from the feds and the anti-feds through the Whigs and the Democratic Party to the current day system of Democrats and Republicans. So go get her, Mr. Richey. I talked too long.
All right. Well, I am so glad that your piece of chalk is not racist. Like that is such a relief, and that you didn't start that whole thing there. Now let's see. I've got a shout out to give here, and let's see who's getting that shout out. That is Brandon Klee. Asked for a shout out, you get one. All right. Now, let me go over a few things here, just a quick sort of powers of the president, Cold World, again, just give you something real quick, okay? So some of these are stated, some are implied, okay? So if we're thinking about the president's roles, first of all, he's commander-in-chief. That is constitutional. Chief executive, that is constitutional. Chief diplomat, pretty much constitutional. Head of state, which the president, we don't really have a head of government in the United States, but, the president, for all practical purposes, is our head of state who represents us in other parts of the world. Now, of course, there was that whole thing with Prime Minister Netanyahu coming and addressing the Congress. And with that, it's like, well, can Speaker Boehner invite Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States, like without talking to the president? Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's traditional to talk to the president before a visiting head of government or head of state would visit. But at the same time, head of state's really a traditional role of the president. Also, as party leader, that nowhere in the Constitution are political parties ever mentioned or sanctioned. And that's one of the president's chief roles there, that he is also seen, or she, if we ever have a woman president, which I'm sure we will at some point, that this person is seen as kind of the de facto leader of their party. Chief legislator. The Constitution says that the president may recommend legislation that would be beneficial. And so that's often seen as a job of the president, that he often recommends. Some people call the president really like a third house of Congress. And then also I like to throw in the scapegoat in chief, because keep in mind that when the economy's bad, it's the president's fault. When everything's bad, it's the president's fault. And sometimes the president gets credit for things being good. Like a lot of people have good memories of the Clinton years, because the economy was pretty good then. Now, also, and I've got this on the thing that I've shared with y'all, as far as the Senate and versus the House. Okay, so if you look at that thing that I've shared with y'all, I go into those things. The biggest things would be like the Senate's tradition of unlimited debate, where you can filibuster in the Senate, not in the House. The House, everything is timed. Like, we will spend this amount of time debating this legislation. If you have the floor, you have it for a certain amount of time. There are 435 people in there. You can't let them all speak as long as they want. So the Senate, you've got only 100, and there is a tradition of unlimited debate. As long as a senator has the floor and does not yield it, then they have the floor. Rand Paul is the last person, I believe, to do a very long filibuster, I think like 11 hours or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the rules are tighter. Like, you have to stand up. You cannot leave the Senate floor and anything like that. Now, somebody can relieve you for a little bit to ask you a question. Now, they have to, like during that Rand Paul filibuster, Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, like, he made a statement and he said at the end of it, I have to end with a question, right? And that's how he did it, because it has to end with a question. You can only yield for a question, and some of those questions, last a while. But anyway, that's there. And also the unique powers of the Senate and the House, which the House, the one unique power that the House has, revenue bills must originate here. All right. Think about no taxation without representation. The House is democracy. Okay. That's where you're finding like the democratic part of the government. And so taxes, any kind of revenue bills must start in the House, because that is where we are most directly represented. Then it goes to the Senate, where cooler heads can prevail. Now, the impeachment process starts in the House, where people tend to be a little bit more hot-headed and direct with the people, and it starts in the House, where you have the impeachment charges. Then it moves over the Senate, cooler heads prevail. Okay, so that happens there. Now, then there is the Senate. And the Senate has those things as far as nominations, okay? Nominations for different, whether it's a cabinet official or if it's a judicial nomination, those only go before the Senate for majority approval. Then there is the issue of treaties, and that is where that goes all the way back to the Roman Senate. Of course, that's where we get the word, but the Roman Senate was, ratified all foreign agreements. And that's what our Senate does, where 2/3 of senators have to ratify. Now, of course, right now, President Obama is dealing with a Senate that is a majority of the other party. So it's going to be very difficult for him to get a treaty put through there, which is why this Iran thing that he's negotiating, he's trying to say is an executive agreement, not a treaty, because there's no way that that treaty would be ratified by the Senate. But the president is supposed to get advice and consent from the Senate before, treaties come up and that sort of thing. So Foreign Princess, a little shout out to you, touching base on foreign policy and defense policy. The thing is, another thing to note is the president typically has more leeway when it comes to foreign policy versus domestic policy, that he's used to getting a free hand. Now, not all the time, and especially when the Senate's controlled by the other party, but most of the time, the president, people will, Congress will defer to the president when it comes to foreign policy, more so than domestic policy. Now, Shay, you don't get penalized for incorrect information on the FRQs. As far as that goes, I'm still like 30 minutes behind on Twitter. I'm going to try to get closer to catching up. Now, you get credit for correct information. Like as far as like on a multiple choice test, you get counted off if you miss one. But as far as the FRQ, you start at 0 and you earn points. So if you have incorrect information, then, that's the other thing I say, don't say too much. All right. Don't keep expounding where something you say is incorrect. But the thing is that if the information they're looking for is there, and if you defined or explained or did whatever, then you're going to get credit for that. You are welcome, Adam. All right. That is very good. Thank you very much. Just favorited that tweet. Something was written on Keith's board earlier. LOL. Maybe I'm just confused. All right, Maria, hopefully you've been unconfused. And there's Brandon again. Already got that shout out. All right. So great. Yes, Maria. Now, another thing that I've been telling people on Twitter, stop sweating the small stuff. Okay. If you're one of those people that just realize, like, oh my goodness, I've got an exam tomorrow, I'd better prepare for that. All right. When you're starting to think, I'm getting things about like BOFA, I don't even know what BOFA is. I'd have to look that up. So just keep in mind that there, huh?
What is it? Did it Freedom of Information Act? Is that what you said?
No, BOFA. Like, it's just like, I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Now, FOIA would be the Freedom of Information Act. But the thing is that if you're just getting around to studying,
you're dead, man. Don't do that.
Huh?
Don't do that. Don't go to that word. If you don't know anything, don't go there. Go big.
Yeah, well, see, yeah, that's the thing. That really what I've done by assembling this page of YouTube videos, that most of them by HipHughes, some of them by me, but he's got a lot of videos in this territory. Like he said, you've got to go big. You want to focus on key content that you know is going to be on the exam. So there's going to be a question about the Marshall Court. There's going to be some kind of question about, you know, campaign finance reform or something like that. You know, there's going to be stuff about the way that Congress works. You know, the Senate and the House, that's going to be on the exam. Focus on that. And HipHughes is about to give you some more stuff to focus on his big board.
I'm going to whip through some vocab, and then Mr. Richey will look through his notes, and we'll, I think I'm going to go to 10 o'clock. I can do 10 o'clock. I don't know about Mr. Richey, but I'm going to keep going because I'm just trying to think, and I'm looking through old exams, thinking about what we didn't talk about. But I have the stupidest analogy ever, so I'm just going to slow down. Mr. Richey was kind of, going over this difference between the House and the Senate. And it's kind of a stupid analogy, but it might work for some of you that haven't really wrapped your heads around the concept yet. I always used to call the House of Representation the mad dogs of government, because the concept would be that the people are kind of like, like Fed 10 talks about, kind of like, the mob, like, tyranny of the majority, like people screaming, I want this, I want bread and butter, whatever, right? So the concept being that if you're going to allow that to have power in the House of Representatives, that voice of the people, man, you need to put that on a leash, right? The idea is that the people control that government, and it's a short leash because it has very sharp powers, right? Revenue powers start in the House. The revenue power, that ability to tax you or to, whatever, take your money, that's the teeth of the dog. And it's such a dangerous dog that we want to make sure that it's direct democracy, it's held by the people, and it's a very short leash. So every 2 years we get to change it. Those are concepts that work with direct democracy. But whatever, I'm going through this right now. You have to know the difference between a caucus and a primary. That's a multiple choice question. The idea is that, for instance, in Iowa, they have caucuses. Caucuses are not secret votes. They kind of vote in the open. And then they kind of whittle it down to 2 or 3 candidates, and people can change their votes. But the big difference is this is not secret. And of course, this is a secret vote. And of course, we're talking about how political parties in this unwritten constitutional way develop a process for nominating a candidate, right? In the olden days, they smoke cigars and say, Johnny, you want to be a senator, want to be a president? Now we don't do that, of course, because the progressive era, starting with the Wisconsin idea and fighting Bob La Follette, developed this concept that we're going to have political parties go through the people. Now, there's a lot of modern day politics where you can talk about what that primary system does to a political party, because it drives it to its ideological ends. Because who's going to vote in a Democratic primary? Like people that are really, really Democratic, like I'm really Democratic. And who's going to vote in a Republican primary? Like someone who's really psyched to be a Republican. So what happens is the candidates, in a sense, have to play to their base, to the people that vote. And sometimes they have to say things to get that nomination that they might not want to say. You might have someone go, well, global warming, I'm not so sure. Yeah. Because he wants that guy's vote, that climate denier, right? And the same thing on the other side, right? Yeah, I'm against the death penalty too. Kill him. And that idea that then you have to drive back to the middle in order to win an election. And sometimes political analysts will say that the one that goes too far to the left or to the right becomes unelectable. So that's a thesis you could work with. You need to know two things about public opinion polls, probably more, but the multiple choice I've seen. Number one, the validity. Like, how do you get the validity of a public opinion poll? How do you know it's valid? And the integrity of it really rests on, number one, having a large sampling. I've seen that question. You have to have a lot of people, and you really have to have language that's not what's called a push poll. Like, I can't ask you, are you against the murdering of unborn babies? Like, there's a different way to ask that question. Do you agree that people that kill innocent children should be put to death themselves? These are loaded questions, and a lot of times people looking for certain statistics will do push polling in order to get the numbers that they want. So we want fair questions, and we want a sample, a margin of error. I think it's less than 4% now. Mr. Richey can correct me in a second, but then I know it's a valid poll, and the larger the sampling, the larger the population, the better. Baker versus Carr is going to be on the exam. It's always on the stupid exam. Baker versus Carr relates to gerrymandering, which we talked about before, and basically saying that gerrymandering is unconstitutional. I'm not allowed to purposely draw lines to exclude people's voices from being equally treated. That's Baker versus Carr. The slogan is one man, one vote. Everybody's vote is treated equally. Of course, proving that, I mean, what's in the intent of the legislature who's drawing the line is quite a different story. But Baker versus Carr, it's on the exam, one man, one vote, like, I don't know, mutter it in your sleep. The Bakke decision is going to be on the exam. That's affirmative action. And of course, affirmative action are policies which are giving preferential treatment to certain people who have faced past discrimination. And we're trying to, in a sense, equalize that opportunity, field. And Bakke is a student, a medical student, I believe, in California, who just can't get into medical school. But his grades are higher than a minority who's getting in. And he's basically saying, this is reverse discrimination. The 14th Amendment counts for me, too. No state shall deny its citizens me equal treatment. And the court agrees. And this really strikes down affirmative action using quotas. So I can't say, got to get me 5% Asian people. I'm not allowed to do that, but they start developing new systems of like pointage and, to get people to those numbers. But affirmative action has been consistently in a certain, current court being struck down every time, really, in new scenarios in Michigan, I believe. And please know how the Electoral College works. Oh, my goodness gracious. Please know that every state is awarded an Electoral College based on their House number +2 for the Senate. That's going to give the lowest possible states 3 electoral votes. The smallest states have 3 votes, and the larger ones, California, I believe, goes up to 54. 271 to win the contest. And of course, in most states, 95% of the states, when you win that state population, you win that electoral college. It's a winner-take-all system. So even if I get 49% of the vote, I don't get any electoral college votes. I get zip. And third parties complain about this because they say, why compete if you don't get a percentage of the pie, like they do in Europe, and they have coalitions because smaller parties will get 15, 20, 30%. But needless to say, you definitely need to know how the Electoral College works. That's really important. And then, the argument for a popular vote would be like a new amendment concept, like Mr. Richey talked about before, having to go through that ratification process of 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of all states. And then, of course, I've already said caucus versus primary. I did that up on top. Mr. Richey, do you want to go for 10 minutes?
All right. Let's see. Yeah, just responding to a tweet real quick. All right. So as far as, let's see where we're going now. Let's see. Shay has asked me some questions. Now, one of those about lobbyists, which Donald Trump was in South Carolina, and I had no idea that he was in South Carolina over the weekend. He's usually there closer to HipHughes. I know HipHughes is probably a big fan, but, Donald Trump said something about, he said the lobbyists were going to come at him, and he doesn't give a blank about lobbyists. So that was just kind of like the line that came from the speech there. Now, as far as primaries and caucuses and all of that kind of stuff, What we're looking at is, you know, like Iowa, they have caucuses. This is very informal, where they go to people's houses, they take kind of a glorified straw poll. Most states don't do things like this, okay? But it's very, very grassroots. When you think about Iowa, very grassroots. Now, as far as primaries, you know, Keith's already talked a little bit about primaries. You know, keep in mind he's got lots of videos about this stuff. You want to look at those.
I didn't do open and close though. I didn't do open and close.
Right, yeah. So I'm gonna go over that now. Okay, so he talked about the idea of primaries, but there are open, closed, and then what you might call blanket primaries. Now there are different terms for that one, but a closed primary in some states. Now I'm going to go ahead. Let me go ahead and screen share with you again, and we're going to go ahead and just look at primaries in the United States. All right, so we're going to look at primaries in the United States. And so United States presidential primary. All right, now let's see. Now that's presidential primary, caucuses, yada, yada. All right, now that is about the primaries and such. Primary election, primaries in the United States. I'm looking for a type of map, but I'm not finding it. Okay, well, I'm just going to have to go with it. All right, so there are states like, for example, South Carolina, where I live, has an open primary. All right, and what an open primary is where you just basically go to vote, and they ask, do you want to vote in the Democratic or the Republican primary? In South Carolina, we don't have an official party registration. If you say you're a Democrat, if you say you're a Republican, that's pretty much up to you. All right, and let's see, Keith, I'm getting some of that cave talk that was happening last time. All right, so you know, as far as your political party, like I could say that I want to vote in the Republican primary, and the next time I could say I want to vote in the Democratic primary. Now I can't like go vote for some in the Republican, some in the you know, once I commit, I'm committed for that election. Now, when they're looking for people who are Republicans in South Carolina, they're looking for people who have voted in the like 2 out of the last 4 Republican primaries or something like that. So a Democrat could theoretically go and vote in the Republican primary to try to screw things up for the Republicans. Now, that doesn't happen much. A lot of people talk about that happening, but it really doesn't happen a whole lot. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind. Some states have closed primaries where you have to be a registered member of the party, like 30 days in advance or however many. You've got to be registered in that party to vote in the party's primary. So that's another one, and that kind of, you know, keeps things a little more ideologically pure, and really kind of like, you know, just kind of closes off independents voting in the primaries. Now, and then there's the blanket primary or nonpartisan primary, where you've got, like in the state of Louisiana, for example, where all of the candidates, it's almost like you throw a blanket over the whole thing, and you throw all the candidates under the same blanket, and then you have this primary election, and the top 2 candidates go on to the general election. This was when in Louisiana, the Democratic primary was dominant. The Democratic Party was dominant, so they didn't want to guarantee Republicans the second spot. Now, the way this has worked out, typically if that happens now, a lot of times a Republican candidate will win outright or something, but that's how it happens, that 2 weeks later they have another election or so. And so that's the different types of primary elections in the United States. So in every state, that's different. Now, the role of lobbyists. Donald Trump may not give a blank about lobbyists, but the exam does. Okay, lobbyists work for different interest groups, and what they do is they're employed by, like, the National Federation of Teachers, or I mean American Federation of Teachers, National Education Association. The AFL-CIO would have a lobbyists. The NRA has lobbyists. The AARP has lobbyists, and lobbyists work for interest groups in order to push their issues. Like they comes from like somebody sits in the lobby. They can't go in the chamber, but they can hang out in the lobby or whatever. And a lot of times we think about somebody, you know, taking legislators out to dinner, but really the chief role of the lobbyist is they provide information, because if you're a legislator, you really don't have much of an idea of every little issue. So the lobbyist will educate you on things. So you go sit down with the lobbyist, they give you data on this, they give you information, and you say, well, thank you, have a nice day. And if this is an interest group that contributes to your campaign heavily, or that's important, then that's something that, you know, you want to listen to that lobbyist. Like, for example, I live in the 3rd District of South Carolina. You better not have an A- rating with the NRA. if you are running in the 3rd District of South Carolina, people be like, where'd that A- come from? You know, that guy want to take our guns away, or something like that. Now, if you go to a district like in New York State, you know, or New York City even, or something like that, it may not matter what your NRA rating is. So keep in mind that, you know, the lobbyists that you listen to will depend on, you know, kind of how important that interest group is in your district. So lobbyists, they're there to lobby. They're trying to persuade you about their issue and inform you about their issue, if nothing else. Okay. All right, Brandon, we're planning on going until 10 and then we'll be done. All right, so HipHughes already hit that. Let me just fast forward a couple of, like way to see what I can do to get things like now. All right, let's see what the most current questions are. All right, feeling as though if I don't watch Tom Richey and HipHughes, I will fail the AP Gov exam. I think you're probably absolutely right, Cassie. But you're gonna, hopefully you'll do well because of that. Yes, we are all right, Shay. We're the real MVPs. 527s. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Keith, that's like the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth and that sort of thing. You know,
527s are like non-affiliated groups. Wink, wink, wink.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Keep in mind, 527 super PACs. Now, this is a survey level test, okay? That this is not an advanced government test. Like, it's a test for a 100 level thing of government. So I'd encourage you things like 527s, 501s, super PACs, put those all in a box, that these are organizations like those soft money organizations that, you know, work in elections to try to influence things. And all of a sudden, Jacob Peterson. All right. Okay. LOL, buddy. Yeah. All right. So anyway, let's see. All right, Maria, a future history teacher. I am so glad that you're thinking along those lines. That is awesome. All right, Flora Isabel, you need to pass the exam. And that was just, gosh, you have blown up my Twitter tonight. And I hope that I've addressed whatever that, gosh, what was that thing you tweeted, like tons of judicial activism, judicial restraint. That was what was put out there earlier when we were talking about a judicial activist that's writing legislation from the bench, you know, being kind of very proactive and creative in their interpretation of the Constitution. And like judicial restraint, where a judicial restraint, that person typically believes in originalism, that I should just stick to the original intent and I should stick to the letter of the law. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. J. Glad that that we're helping out and all of that kind of stuff. Mr. Doyen, man, that was cold. I don't know what was, I don't even know. AFC, what in the world are you talking about? Fiscal policy versus monetary policy. Let's see. Eric, I have got that on my sheet, okay, which my own students, Sierra, AFC, anybody else that's tweeting, make sure if you didn't make it to my review today for whatever reason, I will partially absolve you if you look at that sheet, the enduring understandings, fiscal policy, taxes, spending. Okay, let me show you this sheet I'm talking about for those of you who kind of tuned in, just to make sure that everybody knows what it is that I'm talking about here. That what I did was, there are no questions on here. Again, teachers, don't get all woo, all that kind of stuff. But what I did is I looked at the 2012 exam. I looked at content that my students weren't getting right, and I put it on here. Okay, so what I did was I put that content on there, and let me make sure that we are in we're in HD mode again, just to make sure that you're getting everything here. So the powers for the Senate versus the House is there. Okay, that sort of thing. Ways and means versus appropriations. Ways and means, how are we going to get it? You hear people say, I'm a man of limited means or something like that. I need to share my screen again, I think. Okay, so I thought I was sharing my screen, but now I am. Okay, so as far as the ways and means, that's how do we get it? That has to do with taxes. Appropriations, how are we going to spend it? How are we going to appropriate this money? Presidential maxims. Now, also keep in mind, politicians want to get reelected. Politicians will support or oppose a president. They will vote against their own party. They will defy an interest group, or they will grovel before a certain interest group in order to get reelected. So remember what?
They will eat babies.
Yes, they will eat babies. Okay, that's you know, but yeah, if they want, you know, to get reelected, politicians want to get reelected. So all of those things, interest groups, parties, all of that kind of stuff, for a politician, they want to get reelected. That is the number one thing. That AP government is really about understanding a little bit how our government should work, but that's only 5 to 15%. Really, a lot of it is about how our government does work. And keep that in mind, that the party system is only good insofar as it gets people elected. It's just like in 2008 when President Obama was running for president. Kay Hagan in North Carolina was running for Senate. And President Obama come to North Carolina. He won North Carolina that year. Then in 2012, he lost North Carolina. 2014, he wasn't that popular. He never came to North Carolina to campaign for Kay Hagan. And she was talking about how independent she was. I know some of you are watching, not too far left, not too far right, you know, that sort of thing, that she was trying to campaign as an independent, whereas her opponent, who narrowly won the election, just made the whole thing about President Obama. And that's the thing, that keep in mind that political parties are organized on the national, the state, and the local level. Sometimes national and state parties conflict. For example, like if somebody's running as a Democrat for governor of South Carolina, they're not going to run as pro-choice because that's something that wouldn't really fly here. And then if you go to California, odds are like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was governor of California, was pro-choice because he was in California. When in Rome, if you think about that as far as political parties, Ron Burgundy has some great advice while we're in California, stopping by San Diego. But when in Rome, that, you know, parties, you know, it's just the issues, the voters that you represent, and you will use parties, you will use interest groups, you will use whatever you can in order to get reelected. Okay, so let me just make sure that I'm getting you everything before I pass this to HipHughes. The presidential maxims, as far as some things, that presidents are generally weakened by midterm elections. They're generally weaker in his or her second term, because we could have a woman president, maybe sometime even soon. Generally strengthened when presidential approval ratings are high. The president has more political capital, and the president generally receives more leeway in foreign policy, domestic. Fiscal versus monetary policy. Fiscal policy. Taxes and spending determined by congressional legislation. Monetary policy, interest rates and the money supply, determined by the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So make sure you know the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. I'm pretty sure that out of 60 questions, at least one will address one of those. Okay, so a little bit about oversight, formally amending, you know, then discretionary spending versus entitlements. So there's some budget stuff here, PACs, super PACs, all of that kind of stuff. Agenda setting, the first step, policy making process. So keep that in mind. Take a look at that stuff, because I made this after looking at a practice exam. And let's see, just real quick, is anybody trying to get a shout out or something like that? Already shouted out to Maria. Let's see, we've got Anna here, the president's biggest powers regarding the wars. Congress declares war. The president is the commander-in-chief, Anna, and that is an example of a check and a balance, that the Constitution says the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. But the president cannot declare war. The president has to wait on Congress. Now, the president can deploy troops overseas for a short period of time, like 60 days, has to inform Congress, and in order to keep the troops deployed, the Congress has to withdraw troops. I mean, it has to authorize. Okay, I'm sorry about that. It's getting a little late now. This is my third AP exam. I teach 3 AP classes this year. So the thing is that the War Powers Act, or the War Powers Resolution, you know, restricts the president's ability. So that, you know, war making is an example of the checks and the balances and all of that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and pass this back to HipHughes. He's got a lot written on that board.
Look at my chalk's not racist. It's hanging out with all the other pieces of chalk right there. Non-racist chalk. So what I'd like to do for you guys is take you through some other multiple choice that we have up here on the wall. Somebody asked WWA August 2nd about the different types of courts. You're not going to get a lot of questions, to be honest, about that. But the only names I've ever heard on the exam There's the Taney court, that kind of the court from the Plessy versus Ferguson era, but you're not going to be asked about that. Oliver Wendell Holmes is a good name to know for kind of his Schenck and his fire ruling, but the ones that are on the exam are going to be the Warren Court and the Rehnquist Court. So the Warren Court is going to be, we were mentioning that activist court, or that loose interpretation of the Constitution using selective incorporation in the liberals' eyes to nationalize the Bill of Rights, to expand liberty, and from a conservative viewpoint, to redefine the Constitution and to step on the boundaries of the 10th Amendment. But either way that you look at it, the Warren Court.
Excuse me, Keith. Somebody's being. You might want to next break. There's somebody that needs to be kicked out of the chat room. That's being a little bit racist. So that probably needs to be dealt with. I can't do it because I don't have access.
I don't even see my chat room. Hold on.
Okay.
Is it on the? It's on the actual.
Finish what you're doing, and then you might want to just visit that. Once you're finished with this segment.
Okay. Let me just take a quick look at it because I'm going to kill him. Okay. I'll go back to it and then I'll kill him. Whoever you are, what the heck? What are you doing? That's bad karma, brother. All right, now I'm all lost. How about that? You threw me. All right, make sure the Warren Court and that idea of the activist court, all of those 60s cases, those big interpretation cases, and then the Rehnquist course is going to be more in line with kind of Reagan and limited government and devolution and returning to kind of what they would consider the original, interpretation of the Constitution, or a more pure interpretation, however you want to ring that bell. But that would be the Rehnquist court. Currently, we have the Roberts court. I don't think you're going to be asked specifically about John Roberts, so we won't worry about that. Some vocab that we lost in the mill tonight, guys. We're going to close shop in 10 minutes, guys. The rule of 4. I don't think that we went over that. The rule of 4 is on the exam a lot, like a lot. And it refers to how the Supreme Court picks its cases. And I have a new video called AP Government Supreme Court Jive that goes over all of the fancy Latin words and such on the exam about the court. But one of the concepts of the rule of 4 is that when they're in conference and they're deciding which writs of certiorari they're going to grant, like which cases they're going to listen to, you don't need 5 votes, you need 4 votes. And that's giving the minority on the court a certain amount of power to at least force the majority to hear a case that they might not at first be willing to overturn. Maybe it's a little controversial or something like that. So the rule of 4 refers to how 4 justices are needed to issue the writ of certiorari. You also have the 2000 election. You should absolutely know something about that, at least in terms of how that's the Bush versus Gore Supreme Court case that, in a sense, allowed for George Bush to become president. But that's a complicated case. Go watch the video. I have a video. I actually have a whole list of elections playlist. You can, whoa, thunder. You can go to that playlist, guys, and there's elections for dummies series. Watch like 1 or 2. 32 and 1980, I think, are really great ones. There's a question on political socialization. The answer is your familia. I just gave you a point. You should tweet me, say thank you. That's on the test like every single day. The concept that how do we become political creatures? Like who influences us most? And most close is going to be, there's like a thunderstorm in my house. It's going to be your family. And then after that, we start going to, I believe, like religion, and then school, and then your social circle, and then it kind of expands from there. But the answer is family, I promise you. Political socialization, the most effective, influential factor is how you're raised, your mother and your father, or your guardian, or whoever is at your house. Incumbency, the power of incumbency. Being the leading factor. There's all of these reasons why being an incumbent in Congress means you're going to stay in power. And a lot of that has to do with what you do in Congress. A lot of pork used to be spent in terms of bringing projects to small districts like shrimp museums and silly season stuff, because that candidate knew that created jobs and he was bringing money, the bacon. I got your tax money back. I built you a shrimp museum. And, the Tea Party, as on the right, kind of, come out against that and said that that's just wasteful spending. And of course, it's really a way to keep your job. I've seen the word franking on the exam. Isn't that a dirty word? Franking is male privileges that congresswomen and men have that allow them to get the word out, allow them to spread their message. As an incumbent, and especially, with the influence that you have, and Now people are, raising money for you because you're in there and you're in that iron triangle and you're playing your part. It's just much easier to stay in power. And then this becomes the special interest revolving door that, if you serve 6 years, 8 years, many of those Congress people, they leave, they go right into the industries that they were regulating. They'll go work for the oil company or become a lobbyist for the health insurance lobby or for the, whatever special interest is going to pay them millions of dollars. And this becomes kind of a negative attribute of our current political system or whatever. So it's like we got like 7 minutes. I'm just going to give some big advice about going through the multiple choice. Then I'll ask Mr. Richey for some final words. There's no way we hit everything. And I highly recommend go to Richey's sheet, go look through it, check it off with your electronic pens, run through my playlist, look at a video, go, oh, what the heck is that? Watch that video. If you look at it, you go, oh, filibuster, I kind of know, Senate, move on. You can't get caught in little details. Go for big concepts at this point. But, I think that a system isn't bad for multiple choice. It's a lot of reading. There's 5 answers, and the questions sometimes are pretty long. You have about, I don't know what the math is because I teach history, but I think it's like, what is it, Tom? Like 45 seconds a question? It's something like that.
Yeah, you're looking at 60 questions, 45 minutes. So yeah, you're looking at like less than a minute a question. But as long as you go through it methodically, you're not gonna have a problem. You don't know something, skip it. Don't skip it, but answer it quickly. I would do everything one at a time. Don't screw up your answer sheet.
Right. I tell my kids that if you don't know the answer, make a quick determination. I'm going to go back to it. I never want to see it ever again. Put like a 1 and a 2. And then when you're done with the questions go right back to the ones. You're going to save yourself 30 seconds not scanning through the questions, looking for the ones you have a chance at. Or you can do a 1, 2, 3 system, something really quick. What the heck is that? 3, I'll never go back. Oh, I don't know, maybe 1. And then at least you have a methodical system of getting through it. And then if you're done early, go back and look through your answers for sure. Same thing with the free responses. Go kick the one out of the park right away. And like Mr. Richey says, they don't want more than 1 example if they ask for 1 example. Read the stupid directions. So many kids don't read the stupid directions. It's like a stupid cartoon. It's like a cartoon where you're like, is the coyote really going to do that again? And every year the kid does it again. So please, man, and then answer it methodically. Answer each one directly. Use the words of the question. If it asks you why the monkey climbed up the tree, go, let's take a look at why the monkey climbed up the tree. He climbed up it because. And, they're not looking for Shakespearean writing, guys. They're looking to see if you know the answers. That's it, right? They're like machines in the grading room. They don't care what you think. They care what you know. So stick to the facts, answer them the best you can. And then certainly if you are, no clue about an essay, try to answer it in a limited way. Get it in the ballpark somehow, and you might get a point. And that 1 point might be what pushes you into the realm of getting that college credit. There's no room for quitters, guys. One of my favorite tweets somebody says is that whenever he sees somebody put their head down for more than 5 minutes in an AP exam, he hears that big shot, that sound in the Hunger Games when someone dies. I thought that was really great. So don't put your head down for more than 5 minutes. Don't even put it down. Just keep going like an engine because you always have a chance. It's like that's one of those stupid reality shows, like Amazing Race. You're like, they're out of it. They're never going to win. Never. And then they win because somebody else gets a flat tire. So, Mr. Richey, we got about 4 minutes. Do you want to say some final words, and then I'll sail this ship?
Yes. I'll tell you what. Max, shout out. He needs a shout out for tomorrow. Erica, internal structure of Congress, committees, all that kind of stuff. Keep in mind, committees do the heavy lifting. That when a bill comes to the floor, that bill has gone through the committee. All right, so that's important. Like this committee, that committee, and when it comes on the floor, very few amendments are ever made on the floor. Most of those happen in committees, and committees, keep in mind, are controlled by the major party and that sort of thing. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, also, if Will is watching, I found out. Let's see, I'm getting that echo there. Keith. Let's see.
I got it. I found the racist. I'm very excited. I found the racist.
I tell you what, I just got, I found out something. Evidently, I have a son. Just told me via Instagram that he knew that I looked familiar. He asked his mom about me, said she didn't know me, and now he found his birth certificate, and I'm a father. I have a son. I'll probably
That's
have
freaking awesome.
yeah,
Papa Richey.
Reagan
Papa
said,
Richey.
yeah, Reagan said trust but verify. So I might be looking into that, but that was very amusing. That was the most interesting thing that's happened on my Instagram today. Shout out to Austin Lay, one of my former students, who's in college now. So he's just watching, I guess. He might be watching for fun or something. I'm not sure what's going on, but shout out to that guy. And his whole little bunch, like Jimmy Kidd and all of them, if they're still out there, I have no idea. So we'll see. Yeah, just heard from him randomly. So I'm just kind of shouting out. Appreciate people that have been getting on like Twitter and Instagram and all of that kind of stuff. And we're liking that. So Star Wars and comics, that's great. And you got that. And let's see. What economic policy as President Kennedy is cool. Yes, Mackenzie, I would say that President Kennedy was cool. That is great. All right, but I think Matthew Holt, not the same Matthew. I think that told me that I'm a father. But Matthew, shout out to you, and shout out Paul Vance. That goes to you, Abigail. Very glad about you tuning in tonight. And Ayn Rand is on my bookshelf. Did you? Yeah, consider myself outed. Okay, so yes, we've got the bookshelf creeps. I've got a lot of stuff on my bookshelf. Pretty big Tolkien nerd and stuff like that too. So hopefully you see all of that. And yeah, so great. I think that's great, Tim. Thank you so much. And David, we did a little bit on the War Powers Resolution. Shout out to Uncertainty. I think that is a person. All right, and Abigail got your president. Okay, and President Kennedy, JFK, get those communists. Let them come to Berlin. Yeah. All right, HipHughes, take it away.
So long, farewell, outbeaters, and goodbye. I think that we're gonna sail this ship, guys. I'm terrible at shout outs, like that young whippersnapper Tom Richey doing it all, like #cool, like Nicholas Foti, Anna Backnick, I don't know, Viet, Virtuoso. I suck at this, but I do the teachings pretty good on the YouTubes. We're gonna ask you for a favor, guys. We're gonna ask you to sub. All right, you didn't have to pay for this. This was freebie, baby. #free. All we're asking you to do is sub to our YouTube so you can get updated with our new videos. You don't even have to watch them, but that would be cool. Follow us on Twitter so we can joke around with you and answer questions and be part of your social media experience. That's why we do it, for the love of learning. And definitely don't stay up forever, guys. All right, you need sleep. Your brain is not some kind of robotic machine. It needs like biological fuel. You got to get some sleep, guys, and get a breakfast in the morning. Make sure that you're pumped up for the exam, and you can do it. There's no doubt about it. I'll remind you once again, all the videos that Mr. Richey and myself have, some of them are really short, like 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe you do a couple of those and maybe one really big one for 20 minutes, and then you zonk out and go to bed. But you can do it. You can pass this exam because, believe it or not, it's all up there in your brain. I know it is. You're going to do great. Tell us how you did. Tell us how you felt after the exam. Come back and tweet us or leave us a message on YouTube. And good luck to you guys. I always have the stupidest slogan where attention goes, energy flows. So put your attention into passing, and by golly, you're going to do it. Mr. Richey, you want to say your goodbye?
Yeah, and that's great. Remember, I'm on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram, Facebook. I'm about everywhere you find me. Just look for Tom Richey, and TomRichey.net. Remember, has videos that I've posted and all that kind of stuff, so that you can have some more review. I'm going to try. I may answer a few more questions on Twitter. I may, even though I fell asleep during Game of Thrones last night, and I haven't even started Mad Men. So we'll see. No guarantees, but I may answer a few more questions on Twitter tonight. And then again, good luck on the exam, or as the Dutch would say, success, which is kind of like our word success. I'm going over there this summer. So yeah, if you'll see the pictures I post and stuff, just interested in all things Dutch. All right. So anyway, as the Dutch would say, Beltristan, which is like have a good night or something like that, or go to sleep, or slap lekker is really, sleep well. So yeah, I'm just rambling now because this is the third AP exam, and I am about to venture into the land of AP freedom. Mic
All
drop.
right, bless your brother. Thanks, Mr. Richey, as always, for hooking up the children. And I will say, like a German man, guten Abend. See you later, guys.